Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Mark Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing well. Yourself today?
Can't complain. Can't complain. Actually, I can complain, and maybe I should start there because we're in concert season. And it's not just it's in my kids' school and the school that I work in, and I know that's going on everywhere right about now. And I just have to tell you that I don't know. I don't want to get too. I don't want to go too far along on a diatribe here, but some of the behavior that is exhibited is less than outstanding. And I don't want to say it's civilization at its lowest point because there's Boko Haram and there's ISIS and bikers in Texas. So I don't want to go that far, but there are just some pet peeves of mine that absolutely drive me crazy, and I've gotten a number of elbows in my ribs from my wife who sits next to me at these concerts. And but I'll just give you an example. We have elementary school kids or middle school kids. This has been going on for a long time, and they come out, and it's hard enough for a kid to stand out there on the stage, and there's stage fright and there's nervousness, and their teacher has told them on any number of occasions how they should conduct themselves and be professional and all of this. And as soon as they come out, the parents start screaming their name, calling out, standing up and waving. And the 9 and 10-year-old is exhibiting greater self-control and greater behavior in that setting than the adult. And I just find that it's, first of all, it's rude, like you can't even imagine, but it's so selfish. I mean, you don't need to call out your child's name. Your child is 9. You brought them there. They know you're here. You don't have to remind them. And it's distracting. They're trying to concentrate. They've been working for months on, these 3 songs that they're trying to perform. And for me, it's just I don't know, on a microcosm level, an example of how parenting has become so selfish, and the action of being selfless, like I'm here for my kid, in this particular case actually turns out to be the most selfish thing that the parent does, because it's about them being there for their kid. In other words, they're calling out to their child, look how good a mommy or look how good a daddy I am, that I'm here for you, as opposed to just being there for them. And then when it's over, you give them a hug and you tell them that you're proud of them, and you celebrate what they've done. And you don't have to do that in front of everybody, and you don't have to distract your child, because half the time the kid rolls his eyes because he's being humiliated by his parents and not supported and not loved. And it drives me absolutely bonkers.
And how long has it been that this has been something you've wanted to share with as many people as possible?
What was the date that my child was born?
So, okay. Well, I really have no follow-up to that, other than I'm sorry.
And listen, don't get me started on the flash photography either, because
good, I won't. Okay, so do you want to segue into the conversation for this week?
Is there any way to segue from what I've just done?
No, so just go right to it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I do want to turn our attention to something that I think is really serious and plaguing our schools and our communities and our families, and we can go on and on. And that's the role of social media. And this all started, and the internet got very popular, and chat rooms got very popular. The whole thing that people were worried about was, watch out for the person who's the sexual predator, the person who's trying to portray himself or herself as an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old in the hopes that they'll get a rendezvous and meet up, and all kinds of terrible things would happen. And listen, there were people who were doing that. It's absolutely atrocious, and those people belong in jail without a doubt. But that's not the problem plaguing kids with social media today. It's so much worse. And the real predator is the other 12-year-old or the other 14-year-old or the other 16-year-old who lives down the block, who lives across the street. The one that you've known since, he or she is 3 or 4. That's the real terror in social media. It's not the faceless, nameless minions out there.
Well, as from my viewpoint, I am amazed at how much we do in school to educate kids about proper use of social media, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and we focus so much on cyberbullying, and yet I'm still astounded that kids are doing it. Uh,
Every minute,
yeah,
every minute.
because I hope that the general public understands how many times these kids hear about the negative consequences of their actions, um, as well as whatever you do on the internet. There's evidence. You know, there was a difference when we were kids and kids were being bullied. You could just deny it. It's very difficult,
That's right.
which, by the way, I never did.
Of course not.
The bullying, but there's you can't deny when we have a printout of a Facebook chat. We can't deny it when you see a picture on Instagram with captions underneath it. So I agree, and again, from your position as the administrator, I'm sure you encounter this all day long.
Oh my God. You can't even imagine how much time is spent on social media. And once you take even you put one toe into the pool, it just overwhelms you. The amount, the volume of communications among students, between students, it's it's off the charts. You just can't even conceptualize how much stuff is out there. And as you know, someone who was a former colleague of yours in your school, who just retired recently, he had a sign up in his office. He said, "The internet never forgets,"
Right.
and very, very prophetic, and very true. It doesn't.
And with, I mean, with everything we've talked about already in these podcasts, all of the emphasis is on education. All of the emphasis, which it should be, all the emphasis is on how we can achieve, greater results, and how we can have kids aspiring for challenging themselves, and how we can have kids better prepared for college. Yet so much time is taken up by negotiating, mediating conflicts that come out because of social media.
I mean, I can't even describe to you how mean some kids are to other kids. It's just terrible. I see it with my own kids. I see it in school. I hear about it from my colleagues who work in other schools who share their war stories. And the cruelty is just off the charts. And there's something about the feeling of being anonymous, even though they're not, because half the time their
Right.
name's on the account. Of course, the new thing now is Finsta, which is like the fake Instagram, and but everybody knows whose the fake accounts they are, so it's not even hiding. And then you have Ask FM, which is just atrocious. I mean, it's if the devil were an app, it would be Ask FM because it's all anonymous. But the kids download it and they put it on their phone and they look and they take it to heart, which is awful. I mean, I try to tell the kids when I try to mediate through and counsel them through these things. When I was their age, and I want to sort of get to that, talk about that phrase in a minute. But when I was their age, someone may have written something about me on the bathroom wall or in a note somewhere that was passed in class. There was a very good chance that I never saw it.
Right.
And if you don't know about it, it doesn't hurt you. But when you see everything, it hurts you. And it stays on your phone. So it's not like someone could even write a note, tear it up, and then it's gone. And the memory will eventually fade. You may not completely ever forget it, but the memory of it and the details of it will eventually fade. But when it's on your phone or it's on a wall or if it's on a message, it lives and you can look at it and be hurt by it full blown every single time you take a look.
Right. Well, I also don't think that we should be shocked by this behavior, because all you really need to do is go to the message boards on any local newspaper
Or anything.
or any Yahoo
Any
site,
movie, right.
right. And when anything that's not edited, and you will see, behavior that's probably as bad, if not worse, from people who, when they're anonymous, feel the need to say some of the most disgustingly racist, sexist, bigoted comments you will find. So it's a societal problem. It's not just related to kids, but of course, that's our responsibility when they're in our school.
Right. So I want to get back to that phrase, when I was your age or when I was their age. And, of course, we all know from working with kids that the fastest way to turn a kid off is to start something with that phrase, because they just never believed that you were their age, or that things were that way. And for every generation that has come along, the parent has been able to say to the child, when I was your age, things were relatively the same. I've been there, I've done that, I've experienced what you've experienced. And for the most part, it was true. What had changed were maybe the hairstyles, the piercings, maybe the style of music. But this is the first generation that no parent can turn to them and say, I remember when I was your age, I had it the same way, or, when I was your age, it was similar, because it is not at all similar. And anyone who thinks that is mistaken, and they're kidding themselves. They never grew up in a digital world, and they can't possibly understand what it's like to be a child in a digital world. And I can't tell you a single adult that I've spoken to who would like to switch places with someone who's a teenager today living in a digital world. And that brings me to, on one hand, we sort of celebrate the digital native, and we talk about how, it's wonderful that they're immersed in this technology, and there are many great things about it. But I feel like at home, when the digital native meets the digitally naive, trouble is abounds, and that's where we are right now. We have many parents who don't understand the full power of social media and full power of the internet, because many of these parents are completely misusing the internet themselves on Facebook, updating about when they had if they got a steak for dinner, or they had a bowel movement, and they're living in a fishbowl. And it's like, what I find insane is, for years and years, we heard how celebrities, they love the money and they love, the red carpet, but then they want to be able to go to their house, or they want to be able to go to the supermarket, or they want to be able to go to the zoo, but they can't because they live in a fishbowl. So all the negative aspects of celebrity is now here for everybody, and we're bringing it upon ourselves. And it has such an awful side effect, or an awful impact on what we do and how we conduct ourselves. How many marriages have ended because of Facebook and posts and so on? How many friendships have broken up because of that? People putting up their whole lives on there, and how many people are getting jealous about what they see, what they consider to be, people kind of showing off, whether it's, vacations or their money or whatever it is. It creates such ill will, and these are adults. So now put that in the hands of children, and you have something really, really unfortunate and really awful, because they don't have half the coping skills that adults have, and many adults don't have wonderful coping skills to begin with. So just imagine, what the children have to face.
Right. Well, a few things. First of all, it saddens me terribly that this behavior goes on when you think about that these are kids who are sitting in our classrooms, who are feeling these pressures and these personal attacks, and how it distracts them from just conducting themselves throughout the day. That's clearly priority number one. But I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are so many kids who are using this social media the right way, who are using it, in a positive way, and how it can contribute to the classroom environment. And I hate that we sometimes lose sight of that there are plenty of kids who are able to responsibly and maturely use social media. So we sometimes we forget that, I think. It's not every kid who is engaging in this negative behavior.
Of course, but there are many. There are so many. And
Maybe I'm more optimistic than you. I'd like maybe I'd like to think it's not as bad.
I think it's worse.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. Because now let's just turn to the innocuous things. And I try to share this with, when I speak to parents in various forums and various settings. A simple a picture with a friend. You could be with your best friend or one of your best friends. I mean, when you're that age, you have a new best friend every 15 minutes sometimes. You're with a friend and you take a picture. You're at the park. You're at the ball game. You're at the party, whatever it may be. And that goes up. Now, somewhere out there is another friend of yours who did not get invited to the party, who did not get invited to the park, who did not get invited to whatever that other thing is. And they see that, and all of a sudden they feel like crap. just like that. And listen, when we were growing up, sometimes you did something with friend A and sometimes you did something with friend B, and that's fine. But it wasn't in your other friend's face. And that hurts kids. That really hurts. And that's not someone doing something malicious. That's just the collateral damage of living your whole life in a fishbowl and broadcasting every single thing that you do at all times. And then you have some kids, they'll put up a picture of something, whatever it may be. A picture of themselves, it could be a picture of anything that they're seeing or that they're at. And if their friends don't immediately like it on Instagram or whatever the other app they might be using, it's almost like offensive to the person. Why didn't you like my picture? Now you have a fight. Now you have an argument. Now you have conflict. Now you have tension between people. And for what? See, this is so problematic to me, and I guess I'm sort of a little more emotionally charged about it because I can't tell you how many hours of my day are spent handling these kinds of things and helping students try to see past all of the minutia here and all of the all of this chaos that they've created for themselves
But
through
yeah,
social media.
right. But now you started that with the more innocuous cases, and you gave examples, and I think that those type of situations, you're right. It's different when it's on the internet. It's different when there's evidence. But I do think we still have to, like we've always done, teach kids to persevere and to overcome that type of behavior. Unfortunately, life brings with it obstacles. It brings with it hurt. It brings with it rejection. And I think
Right.
we do, and maybe I think because we're so focused on so many other aspects of the job that have changed, with clearly the emphasis on testing,
Hmm.
where we lose sight that part of being a teacher is helping kids to realize that it does get better, and it's how you handle adversity that's going to really demonstrate your strength and your maturity and growth as a person. Again, I want to emphasize that's for the more innocuous, I didn't like a photo or I didn't invite you to a party. When it crosses, and that's the difficulty for administrators, is when does it cross the line, and how do you deal with it when it becomes cyberbullying, when it becomes far more dangerous.
Well, I'll tell you, it crosses the line very, very frequently
Yeah, well,
because you get a gang up effect and you have
right.
players who are on the periphery that don't have anything to do with anything, but they're following because everyone has 700 friends, 1,400 friends, 1,900 friends. And in reality, the word friend is completely misused because if you're lucky, you have a couple of friends in your life and you have mostly acquaintances and people that and then maybe you share a little bit with, but they're only a very small handful of people that you could truly trust and share, of yourself. And so when they start chiming in, and all it takes is one person to say like, fat bitch or whatever it is, and then the next 30 chime in and say ha 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 or LOL or LMAO or whatever it is, and now they're just agreeing. They're not saying the bad thing. They're just in like a chorus chiming in and agreeing. And now, next thing you know, in an instant, and it takes a minute, you have 30, 40, 50, 100 people who are laughing at you virtually. And it just is destructive to self-esteem and
Yeah.
everything else.
And what you described. Look, you can. We pick up. Well, I don't say we pick up the newspapers anymore. We open up a site for newspaper articles on a weekly basis, and you read about stories in Ohio, in Tennessee, in Texas, in
Hmm.
California.
Hmm.
It's rampant, and so many of these issues, you know, stem from social media. And we only hear about the truly tragic ones. We really, from throughout the country, we
Hmm.
hear about the ones that end in crimes. We hear about the ones that ends in tragedy. But you're right. It's definitely something that needs to be addressed. I guess what I'm looking for is, how do schools handle this, because there's no protocol for it. How do you deal? I mean, I'm sure there are parents who think that what they do on social media is they are right, and you don't have the right to punish them,
Hmm.
because you read stories about that all the time as
Right.
well. If it's
Hmm.
Well, think about when we were in school, if kids got in a fight, off school grounds, a physical fight. Well, I don't remember kids getting in trouble for that. I even remember kids saying in school that they were going to fight off school grounds to prevent them from getting in trouble.
Right.
So that's what's really become difficult. And I hate to be so like pro government involvement here, but I really think legislators probably have to start to consider how schools can handle this.
Well, the other side of that is how litigious a society we've become.
Right.
So, everyone used to say that nothing was anybody's business but their own, and they handled it, and that was that. But now people will sue at the drop of a hat, and wonder where your intervention was on on the school side of things.
Right.
So it's put a lot of additional pressure on the school. And listen, we want to help students socially, emotionally, and academically. Um, and as well as I do that if they can't focus in class because of what's going on with their social media lives,
Right.
then they're not going to be able to figure out the hypotenuse of a right triangle because their world is crumbling, and their phone is blowing up, and they're supposed to focus on their homework or on participation in class. It's just not realistic. So it just becomes hugely problematic. And I have to turn the attention and the light on parents first, because it comes back to my theory about the digitally naive, trying to work with the digital native. And in many cases, parents aren't as swift with the technology as the kids are. That is going to happen. I mean, that's just a matter of the natural order of things. But there are things that parents can do, and they don't, unfortunately. Many don't. Some do, but not enough. Like controlling passwords or knowing passwords. Getting in touch with your mobile carrier and being able to turn off a phone at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Pick your time, but at least exercise some control. But that leads to fights. That leads to arguments with kids. And very often, parents nowadays, one of the shortcomings of parents nowadays is they want to be the friend, but they don't want to be the parent. And to be a parent is to be more than a friend. You're not a friend. You have to be the guardian, and that means sometimes you have to piss off your kid for his or her betterment. And you have to be willing to stand confidently when you do that, and not cave in. And eventually, they're gonna test defenses, because God knows they're genetically programmed to do that. And that's all well and good. But you have to be able to stand tall and do the right thing. And one of those things is being able to hold out your hand at any point and say, "Put that phone in my hand right now, and I'm going to go through every single thing on there, whether you like it or not." And I guarantee you, most parents do not have the ability to do that. They don't. They sometimes don't even know how to turn their kid's phone on.
Yeah. Although we have to be fair in that any type of blocking mechanism that you employ, kids do seem to get around it very, very,
They
very
could they could
quickly.
circumvent it. That's
They
true.
do seem to. So I'm not sure if that's. I think the the better approach is really to try to get kids to understand that this behavior is not acceptable.
Oh,
And yeah,
absolutely.
and of course I know you understand that, but it's just it's troubling because it really is. It's having such a negative impact on kids' educational progress, and I think we sometimes focus on the wrong causes of why students aren't doing well. Is it they're not taking notes properly, they're not studying properly, the teacher's not presenting the material properly. A lot of times it's just the kids are focused on other things that are, whether they might seem serious to you or not, to those kids, it seems like the most serious thing in the world.
Right. I think I read a an ed book once. They call that the unspoken curriculum. Those are the things that go on in the school, in the classroom, in the community. That's not ever stated, but it's just as real as anything that is. But speaking of the adverse effect on education, so there was an article maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago now in the Times. They had done some studies, and they found that there were children who were misdiagnosed for ADD and ADHD because they were exhibiting all the signs in school. And what they concluded was, and these kids were medicated because of the diagnosis. And what it turned out it was, they kept their cell phones with them in bed at night, and they were in group chats. So throughout the night, the phone would go off, and they'd hear zip, 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 and they would get up, they'd respond to the group chat, and they'd go back to sleep. And the constant cycle of disrupted sleep
Right.
basically led them to demonstrate or exhibit signs of ADHD and ADD in class, and they were medicated.
Right.
And that's sick. I just find that to be so disturbing.
Yeah. I can relate because until I had my sleep apnea diagnosed, I felt the same way.
Well, you were in a group chat.
I was not in a group chat. I think it was in a private chat because I was talking to myself in my sleep. So,
So okay, so we kind of beat up parents a little bit. So what can the school do in your opinion?
oof. I really, that's a tough one. I, I'd like to think that we need to do more with character education. And I know that that sounds like a cliche, but I just think we're too caught up with the curriculum, covering material, preparing for exams, and part of life is teaching kids, and if that means having small group, sessions with the social worker, and that means a lot of getting some great assemblies with great speakers, inspirational speakers who can come in. I think your school had it. We had the Challenge Day,
Hmm.
which is that show that was it was on MTV, and I think we may have talked about it. The kids are still talking about the impact that it
Phenomenal.
had. Yeah, but now let's be realistic. You take kids out of the class, and what do teachers say? Oh, I have to prepare for a regents, and you're taking the kids out of my class. But so now that becomes part of the education, explaining to teachers the value and the importance of programs like this, because if the kids are less distracted by these problems, they're going to perform better on your exam down the line,
That's right.
regardless of what you. So I think, and I just know from my experience in high school, I just felt as if my teachers were very in tune to having discussions like this. It wasn't just in an English class when it comes up in a theme for literature. It was all throughout the, but that's the reality. I mean, the
Right.
reality, it was, there was just an ongoing discussion from teachers as they were teaching. There wasn't this crazy rush to try to always cover, material. You have to be
For
able
the
to
sake
talk.
of covering it.
Right. You
Yeah.
have to, every now and then, topics come up, discussions, real life problems, and they have to be addressed. And like I said, proper use of assemblies and small group settings. And but it's troubling. It's
Yeah.
troubling.
And listen,
And there has to be consequences when the behavior, crosses the line.
absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think another role that the school can play, and not that I hate to put more on the shoulders of the school, because the school is becoming a one-stop shop for everything, and
Right.
and we just don't have necessarily the resources to be all things to all people. But one thing that could help is for schools to bring parents in and do these similar types of programs for them, and empower parents and give them the kinds of information that they need. Because listen, I have an advantage, and much to my children's chagrin, I live in their world and have lived in their world for 20 years, and so I'm very much attuned to what's going on in their world and kids in their age groups. So I know about the various social media applications and so on, and I understand how terrible they can be, and so I have a little bit of an advantage there, and I know sort of where to look and what the signs. Not that I'm a perfect parent, because I'm not, but at least I have a leg up. But maybe to give parents that kind of information, and empower them, because again, I hate to keep harking back to my own childhood. I used to come home, I would, grab a snack or whatever it is, and I'd hop on my bike and I'd be gone. And my mother would say, "Come back for dinner," and off I went. And there was no cell phone or anything else. And when the sun started to go down, I knew that I better have my butt back in my house, or else there was going to be a price to pay. And I did. But while I was out there, I could have been out there with literally anybody on earth, um, and it sort of exposed to all the elements and the dangers therein. Nowadays, kids, they come home and the parent locks the door, but the kid is in the room and they're on a cell phone. And that to me is more dangerous than what I was doing riding my bike out in the neighborhood.
Right.
And and the fact that the parent you know, doesn't necessarily go into that room and check up on what's happening and ask questions and follow up is scary because they could literally be in your house with anybody, and you can have the best lock and the best alarm system and everything else, but if you have a Wi-Fi connection, or if you have an internet provider or a cell phone provider, then anyone on earth can be in that room with your child, and there could be sexting going on, there could be images being shared, and it's so scary, but yet so prevalent. There's so much sexting that is going on between children, and it's really alarming.
So it most certainly is, and again, it's when you have this discussion, you really feel for how daunting the challenge is for educators, because it all spills into the school.
That's right.
It all comes into our hallways,
That's
into
right.
our locker rooms, gymnasium, lunchroom. That's what they're not talking about your lesson on the Persian Gulf War. They're not talking about the quadratic equation. We'd like to think they are, and
Right.
there are some, but this is what's going on all day long.
Right. And then that all funnels directly into my office.
Exactly. So
That's the fun part.
I know.
All right, let's transition because we can go on and on about that. It's just a massive topic. But let's transition into our methods lab segment. And an idea that we were kind of banding about is the topic of reading aloud in class. So, when should a teacher read aloud, and when should a student read aloud, in your opinion?
I really struggle with this because I do understand the benefits of having students read aloud. First of all, it's a skill that is important. You know, just a comfort zone for kids to be able to speak,
Hmm.
whether they're at their desk or whether they're in front of the classroom. You know, I've seen that. I've had some eighth graders for the first time this week actually speak more openly in front of the class, and I mean, so much less confident than they are when they're at their desk asking questions.
Hmm.
So I struggle because when a student uh, misspeaks, I'm always afraid and fearful of the other kids. Even though I say at the beginning of the year how important it is to make everybody feel comfortable, you still know that when they leave the room, the kids are going to say so and so can't read.
Right.
But it also helps me when students are reading out loud to know what words they stumble upon.
That's right.
It helps me. So this is a tough balance. I think it's certainly not something that I do regularly. I do know that there are some teachers that do it much more often than I do. But I really try to gauge the personalities of my class. It's not something I'll do early in the year until I get to feel, because I know there are some kids, and you might disagree. I have some kids that are just so afraid to
Mm,
speak that I'm not going to put them in that position. I'm not going to
right.
make anybody nervous in my classroom. I'm going to try to build up their confidence as the year goes on.
Right. Well, you can make the argument though that if that's the case, the more you do it, the better, because it becomes a part of everyday life in the classroom, and everyone's going to have so many different opportunities, and everyone's going to make mistakes, from time to time, that
Right.
making a mistake becomes commonplace in the classroom. So, almost if you do it less frequently, if you make a mistake, when's the next time that you get to sort of redeem yourself, so to speak? So you could certainly argue the other side that you shouldn't shy away from it
Absolutely.
because of that. And the same reason why you want to call on non-volunteers, because you're going to have your superstars in every class who will have a hand up literally every time you ask something, and sometimes even when you don't. And that's wonderful, but you also don't want to let them dominate the class, because it will eventually put off the ones who are less confident. And so, I mean, there are different kinds of tricks to getting around that. Like, first of all, giving ample wait time is a great way to do that, because students get to formulate answers. Another thing you could do is ask them to write down a response, and then you can go through and up and down the aisles. And then when you see a child has a great response, you say, "This is great. In a few minutes, when we share, I'm going to ask you to read yours." And this way, they have a built-in confidence booster that you already approve of their answer, and now when they read it aloud, they feel like they're doing so on safer ground. It's not just reading from a document that they haven't seen before. So that's one way to sort of get them into the flow. They don't have to read aloud, just with that unknown cold read. They could do something a little simpler, a little friendlier, and then once they build up some confidence, then you can get them on, that handout or that document or the text from the book or the play.
Right. I do know a lot of teachers who I've heard speak who talk about exit cards, where they have students write down a response or ask a question on a card as they're leaving the classroom as a way of building up their participation.
Mm.
And I know what I've often done with the younger students is whenever there is a test or a reading that they have for homework, I ask them to write down all the vocabulary words that they don't know from the exam, regardless of whether it's the right answer or not.
Right.
And I know you early in your career you used to do that. Was it the word wall?
Yep.
So there are ways to build up a kid's reading and vocabulary without necessarily having them read regularly. And then, of course, when you do have the kids read in class, you have to be able to make sure that kids are not tuning out if they think that certain kids are going to be reading. So there are ways to handle that as well.
Right. So now, since you mentioned that,
Yeah.
I've seen some different strategies there. Some I find to be effective, and some I find to be sort of on the cute side, but they become distractions. And what I'm talking about in particular is when the student who's reading gets to select the next student who reads.
Right.
The concept sounds great, but it always proves to be a distraction.
Yeah, well, the
I'll
kids
say
are
almost
more
always.
well, yeah, because the kids are now, instead of focusing on the reading, they're more in anticipation of who are they going to call on.
Correct.
It's the same principle of if you tell kids you're going to read one paragraph at a time and go desk by desk, the kids aren't reading; they're counting which paragraph do I have to read. So yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky, and also it's yeah. You also have to say proper use of class time. Face to face time is. I mean, that's what I struggle with the most is that I have a limited amount of time with kids, and in the course of those 43 minutes, what do I want to accomplish with them? What
Right.
do I think is the most valuable use of the time?
Right.
So,
So, there are, again, competing schools of thought, and I've tried both, and I always felt like it with everything else, you want to have a variety of approaches. So sometimes I'll ask a class to read silently, to read a document silently for a few minutes. Of course, the fear is that they don't read it, and then they've missed out. So reading aloud helps everybody hear it, so that's good, and they can follow along if they're weak readers. So that you can go back and forth. That's why I feel like you need a variety of strategies to really maximize your effectiveness in the class. And then the other side is we've been talking about the students reading, but when do you read in the class?
uh, in terms of what
And
time?
anything. When do you read? When does the teacher read
Oh,
aloud, or
when?
when should a teacher read aloud, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I usually read when I find the document of such significance that I want to be able to read it for emphasis to get the main ideas through to the kids. Something that I think is just so critical, and also something that I know what to emphasize
Hmm.
in the reading. If we're reading an excerpt from a presidential speech and I know what the key part is, I can build it up a little bit more with my ability to speak. Whereas kids wouldn't do that because they're just struggling to decode some of the words.
Right. Well, because they would read, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the wall,
Right.
and they'd lose the whole.
And they lose the whole meaning. So I think that's
Right.
what I usually do.
So what does a teacher hope to accomplish with all of the reading that goes on in the classroom?
I think we've kind of touched on. I think that some of it is confidence building for students. Some of it is, I think, figuring out the level of reading of your students, and I think it's just a good skill to be able to do for students.
So let me focus on English classes in particular right now, because we've talked about, if you're in a science class, you're reading a science document or you're reading a social studies historical excerpt of a speech or what have you. But now you're in English and you're reading The Outsiders, or you're reading Hamlet, or you're reading, you know, name your work, Animal Farm. How much of that book or that play should be read aloud in class, in your opinion?
Oh, now you're really putting me on the spot. Um,
Well, you're the only other person I'm talking to
that
on this
is true.
podcast right now.
I I think if we want students to build up their reading skills, I think they have to be reading at home. I think you have to give them ample time, but they should be reading home. However, I would say when it comes to a Shakespearean play, that's probably something that should be read in the classroom. I think it's so challenging for students, and there's obviously a wealth of benefits from Shakespeare that I think should be done in the class. But I
Right.
am far, if there are any English teachers out there, I will be more than willing to listen to the counter to what I just said.
Yeah, I agree that I think plays in general, because they're designed to be performed, you can get more out of
Right.
reading them in class, and different students playing different roles, and because it's designed that way. A novel is not. So I feel like a novel should be more done independently. But of course, now the counter argument that comes from the frustrated English teacher is, I assigned chapter one or I assigned chapter seven and they didn't read it. So now I'm
Right.
prepared to do a great lesson on it in class, but I can't move the rock because they haven't done the work on their end.
Well, you know what? My response to that'll be as we get closer to the summer, and we are getting very close to that moment. Maybe we should do an entire show dedicated to selecting readings because I know that summer assignments are a hot topic,
Hmm.
and what we should be asking kids to read. I mean, I think that would be a show into itself.
That's great. And you know what? Maybe we can get an English teacher on and join the conversation with us, and get the perspective straight from the English teacher.
Sounds great. Well, I'll
All right.
start recruiting now, and you start recruiting.
Excellent. That sounds really good. We'll
Okay.
have to pick up some additional microphones. Um, and now next week you're going to be off in parts unknown to grade the AP exam.
Yes, I'm leaving for Louisville, Kentucky on Saturday, May 30th.
Okay, so a little more than a week.
A little more than a week, yes. Saturday, May 30th.
All right,
And I'll
good.
be
So
gone for 9 days.
very nice. We'll definitely get one in before, and then maybe we'll do a Kentucky podcast, and that should be fun. Our first interstate podcast. For those who are interested, Nick and I actually don't sit in the same room while we do this. This is all Skyped and recorded. So I guess it won't matter if you're where you are, where I am, or if you're in Kentucky and I'm in Timbuktu. It's as long as there's a Wi-Fi. There's probably a stronger Wi-Fi signal in Timbuktu than there is on Long Island, but that's an optimum problem.
You've gotten a lot off your chest today.
I feel so much better. I'm going to sleep
Yes,
like a baby
I
tonight. That's for
know.
sure.
Okay, well, enjoy
But
your.
so that's our podcast for today. If you'd like to follow us on the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com. We're also in the iTunes store. You could search for us there. If you do, please subscribe. That would be great. You could also follow us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. And if you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic or refute any of the things that we've said here, or maybe even agree, something crazy like that, you could do that at ask@stateofedpodcast.com. And that is our show for the week. So thank you very much, Nick, and look forward to speaking to you next time.
Same here. Take care.
Have a good one.